TV show Lost has a very common background going through the whole thing. It's always set on the island. These people, this is the backdrop, they're stranded there after a plane crash, and that's the broad arc of what's going on, whereas with Edward III we've got this broad arc, this broad background of the start of the 100 Years' War. What made Lost so intriguing for a lot of viewers, like myself, was that every episode we followed one specific character. We would get some of their story, we'd get a little bit more of their background, we'd figure out a little bit more about why they're here, what their place is in this story, and then the very next episode we'd put them away for a little while and move on to the next character. Edward III does something very similar to that to me, where we start off in the English court, and then we move on to the story about the Countess that the king starts to woo at one point, and her entire story is completely done by the end of Shakespeare's Act 2, and then we put her away, and then we move on, and we start to look at the French royalty, and the king, and his two sons, and the princes, and then we finish that story up a little bit in the start of the 100 Years' War, and we put that away for a little bit, and then we introduce some new characters, as late as Act 3 and Act 4, this character of Salisbury, who's this sort of ideal English soldier, and he has this prisoner Villiers, who is a Frenchman who abides by a certain code of honor, and we take that story and we move Villiers to one of the French princes, and we get a little bit more of that story, trying to flesh out that. So we get these just unusual little pockets where we get the story that's almost completely self-contained in front of the backdrop of the 100 Years' War. We finish that story and then we move on to the next story. I just find that very intriguing.
The French are trying to claim right to the throne, and I believe that my dad is the rightful heir to the French throne, and so I'm fighting for my kingdom and for my future crown as well. As far as I know, he's called the Black Prince because he wears a black armor, has black shield, and in battle he kills a whole lot of French people, so he's pretty bad on the battlefield. Coolest thing I do in fighting in France. Well, I'm really glad that we got back to sword and shield fighting and having the big battles on stage, so I'd have to say fighting two people at once is a lot of fun.
Well, personally, he does, when he goes to repulse the Scots, he falls obsessively in love with a countess there. And it is very obvious that he's never felt that kind of passion before. He seems to love his queen, but it seems to be an arranged marriage as opposed to somebody that he fell in love with. So he's actually almost going through puberty for the first time as an adult male when he sees this woman. And he comes out of that experience stronger and more able to be the king and master his passions in order to lead the men in battle in France.
The poetry really sounds like the rest of the poetry and the imagery that he uses. I think a lot of my lines weren't necessarily his, however, the verse structure in this play is almost perfect, and I think having that in there is, you can really see Shakespeare's hand in that.
It's the way the different characters grow and the way that they are treated, the humanity that Shakespeare, I truly believe Shakespeare, imbues them with. It's not always perfect and pristine. They have human flaws. They have fears. They have weaknesses. They make mistakes. And through the course of the play, they work to overcome those mistakes, which is a certain level of humaneness and humanity that was, I believe, pretty specific to the way Shakespeare wrote.
And particularly for me, for my part, it's the section where King Edward falls in love with the Countess. His love poetry very much is very similar to me to the poetry of Romeo and Juliet, which would have also been an early play about the same time. In particular, his references to the sun and comparing his love to the sun and the day and night imagery is so similar to Romeo and Juliet. And when somebody asks me a question about is this Shakespeare or not, the line I like to quote is, hers more to praise than to tell the sea by drops, nay, more than drop the massy earth by sands, and sand by sand print them in memory. That's Shakespeare.